Hey, and welcome back to Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course, Lesson Book Level 1. This video is Lesson 22, which covers page 27 in our book. The warm-up using C, G7, and F chords, and the song When the Saints Go Marching In. So let's talk about this warm-up at the top of the page first, using these three chords. So as a review, this is left hand bass clef. We're still in our C position. So you've learned three chords at this to this point. You've learned the C chord, C, E, and G. You've learned the G7 chord, B, F, and G. And you've learned the F chord in our previous lesson, which is C, F, and A. So this warm-up is very useful for When the Saints Go Marching In, which is going to be using all three of these chords. So notice the warm-up is all quarter notes, so it doesn't matter if we go fast or slow, but what does matter, of course, is accuracy and evenness. I'm going to go pretty slow. So we're going to start with our C chord. We're going to play it 4 times, and then our G7 chord 4 times. Back to C 4 times, F 4 times, and finally C as a whole note. And then it repeats. I may not repeat it just for time, but here it goes. All right, so watching that, you may say, hey, that looked pretty easy. Nice, let me try it. For some of you, you may try it and say, that didn't go so well. Even though you've been playing these chords, at this point, they may not be perfect just yet. And most of it has to do with continuing to develop these muscles in our fingers. Not relying on the strength of the entire hand, but rather depending on the individual strengths of each of your fingers. So what do I mean by that? Let's analyze. So when you play the C chord, that's pretty easy. C, E, and G. Okay, those, 5, 3, and 1. Those 3 fingers played at the same time. If these notes are not being, heard at the same time, if it's uneven, work on whatever finger's coming in late. Try to rebalance, make it come in on time. Listen for one good, clear sound. And what's really going to help are having those curved fingers. So your fingertips are engaged on the keys. Okay. Now I have spoken in previous lessons about the fingers that are not being played. In this case, I'm looking at the second finger. It's really important that when you play the C chord, try to keep it curved as much as possible. Because when I go to my G7 chord, that second finger is going to play the F. And if it's already curved and leaning towards that F, it's going to be a lot easier. It's going to be smoother. It's going to be faster. So if you're on the C chord and your finger is way out here, it's going to take a lot longer to readjust. So when you get to this point, when it comes to speed and accuracy, it's not going to happen if your finger's out here. See? It's not going to work. So let's see, the G7 chord. Now I'm going back to my C chord in this case. Now look at my third finger. That's actually not great. So in previous lessons, if I mentioned anything about that third finger needing to be right there, everyone's hand's different. Some of you might not have a problem with that, larger hands. I have actually pretty small hands. After all these years of playing, my third finger naturally shoots out there. I'm able to adjust pretty quickly. Now the third finger is our strongest finger. It's our longest finger, and I think it has the most strength. A lot of times in music, if you're jumping up to the keyboard and hitting a single note, they'll have you do it with the third finger because it's just the stronger and the most accurate. So my point is, I believe that you might be okay if your third finger is out a little bit, but still keep it in mind, where you're going when you go to that C chord. Okay? So just be aware. But in the case of the second finger, I think that one personally is more important. And I think it's easier to make sure that it's curved. Because when you play the C chord, look, it's already there. It has no choice. It's already there. Okay, so our last chord is the F chord. So if you're on the C chord going to the F chord, well, the second finger once again applies, just like going to the G7 chord. If that curved finger is right there on the F, when I go to the F chord, it'll be a lot easier. And all I have to worry about is just moving that thumb, which is very easy to do because of the way, our thumbs work. So we got our C chord. G7, the pinky should only move to the B. So if you have a small hand like me, you're stretching that pinky to the B, your third finger may end up going over there. Now, I try to keep it as close as I can within comfort. If it's shooting out way over there, that may be quite an issue coming back to the C. But I do try to keep it as close as I possibly can to this E when I come back to my C chord. Okay, and then lastly, the F chord, second finger on F, just move the thumb, and then back to my C chord. So if those chords are still not fluid enough yet, I would not proceed to the piece yet. I would keep working on this warm-up a little bit longer. Hopefully everything I said makes sense. Nothing that I say is ever going to be 100% true for everyone. Everyone's hands are a little bit different, but hopefully at least it gives you some ideas where to go if you're stuck and saying, I just can't get this. At least there's some options to look at. Okay, so looking on, When the Saints Go Marching In. In the pink box, we're going to learn something new here today. Incomplete measure. Some pieces begin with an incomplete measure. The first measure of this piece has only 3 counts. Now take a look at our time signature and When the Saints Go Marching In. 4/4 time, but if you do the math, 3 quarter notes in that first measure does not add up to 4. It's only 3. Incomplete measure. It says here the missing count is found in the last measure. If you look at the very end of the piece, the very last measure does in fact only have 1 count. When you repeat the whole song, you will have 1 whole measure of 4 counts when you play the last measure plus the first measure. So you're running through the entire piece, you get to the very end, very last measure, that's beat 1, and when you repeat back to the beginning, there's beat 2, 3, and 4. But when you initially start the piece, you're not going to count 1, 2, 3. You will count 2, 3, 4. Now in music, this is also called a pickup measure. The idea here is you're kind of leaning into, beat 1 of the next measure. It feels like you're almost starting in the middle, and there's this sense of it's not a very strong start. It's leading into, it's a pickup. So hopefully that makes sense. It's really common in music. And this book's talking about the repeat sign at the end. Not every piece of music is going to have that repeat sign, and they still will have an incomplete measure at the beginning. So whenever you start a piece of music, it's really important that you look for the beginning measure and count the beats. And if you count 3 or 2 or even 1 and it's 4/4 time, that's obviously an incomplete measure or a pickup measure. The proper way to count it is work backwards. In other words, like I said, it's not beats 1, 2, and 3, it's 2, 3, and 4. So working backwards means if I'm in 4/4 time and I have one beat in my incomplete measure, that's beat 4. Backwards. I'm starting at the last beat of the measure. If there's 2 beats, it's beats 3 and 4. And like this case, 3 beats, it's beats 2, 3, and 4. As a solo pianist, this probably doesn't make a huge deal. If you're playing in a group setting, and that could just be one other person, a singer, another pianist as a duet, or an entire band or choir, everyone has to be on the same page with their counts, so we're all together. So it's really important that this language is used, and hopefully, a conductor or a leader would use that, or at least, make sure everyone's on the same page. Okay? So to do it properly, we're going to make sure that that's beats 2, 3, and 4. And then the next measure, we're back on beat 1. Okay. What I want to do first is look at just the melody in the right hand. It's a pretty popular tune. Some of you may not know this tune, and that's okay. That's why we read music, so that we can play not only music that we're familiar with, but perhaps music we're unfamiliar with. All right, so I'm going to go through and play the right hand. When I'm done playing the right hand, I'm going to explain maybe a couple things I noticed. I think I'm going to count out loud too, because there's some ties here. There's some long holds, and it's really important that we honor those. For instance, the second measure, or if you want to say it, the first full measure. That has a whole note. It has a G right there with your 5th finger. And it's tied into the next measure, okay? So I think I will actually count this aloud as I play it. So here we go. And by the way, one more thing. When you have an incomplete measure, you can say out loud or say to yourself, beat 1, and then come in on beat 2. You can also give yourself a full a full measure to count off. So for example, I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And I've done this on some previous lessons where I've given a count off. And that really helps, it makes it very clear where the beat is. All right, so here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And then it will repeat. For now, we won't do that. So a couple things I noticed. That the counting and the rhythm isn't too difficult. You're dealing with quarter notes, half notes, and whole notes. Let's talk about the pitches. So it starts on middle C at the very beginning, and then it skips up to E, and then the next note F, and then G. Pretty clear. It repeats it. The same exact idea is repeated again. On the second line, first measure, you'll repeat that idea again. Now in the second measure, we have a G for 2 beats, right? Half note. Here it skips around a little bit. You're going to go down to an E. The next measure, you're going down to a C. You're going back up to an E. And then you got a D at the end of that line on the whole note. So those 2 measures are all skips. G, E, C, E. Now the cool thing about that might be helpful, that outlines a C major chord in the right hand. So if you're familiar at this point with the C major chord and the 3 notes, that's what it's outlining. Only notes of that chord. So that might be a little helpful. So like I said, continuing, we have a D, whole note tied to the third line. There is a rest on beat 2 of the first measure on the third line. Then you come in with E, D, C for 2 beats again. Next measure, we skip up to E, we skip up to G. Once again, outlining a C major chord with those notes. The last measure has G. Now I just noticed something. You see above the G it says F. There's a lot of people that get confused. They see that F and they want to play the F. As a review, the F that's written in there, that is for your left hand. Or more specifically, that's for the chord that's being played in that measure, which is being played by the left hand. It's not being played until beat 3, which we'll get to in a little bit. But anytime you see those letters written above the treble clef, it actually has nothing to do with the notes you're playing in the treble clef. It has everything to do with the chords that are being played in the bass clef. Why is it written above the treble clef? It only really makes sense in fake music, fake books, real books, because those books simply have the melody written and the chord symbols above it, and that's it. There's no bass clef and there's no chords written in. So when you're reading the notation here, it's a little confusing. So if you have to, you can white those out, you can scratch those out if they're a distraction from the right hand. But just know that the last measure on the third line, that is in fact a G, if you look at the staff in the treble clef. And then it goes to an F. And again, that F has nothing to do with the F written above. That's just where an F in the treble clef lies. Now that F is a dotted half note tied to a half note on the bottom line. That's a total of 5 beats. Okay? So the way we would count that, starting on the G in that measure, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and then we move on beat 3 to E, F, next measure G for 2 beats, skip to E, then we have D, we have D again, and then C held down for a total of 5 beats. When you put the repeat in, you just go right on back to the beginning to beat 2, 3, 4, and continue the song one more time. The second time, obviously, you just end it there. Basically, that'd be beat 1, and then you're done. So that covers the right hand. Now let's look at the bass clef, the left hand. Does not enter until beat 2 of the second measure, or the first full measure. I haven't really decided. Some people say second measure. Some people call it the first full measure. I guess it doesn't really matter as long as we're in the same place. But technically, it's the first full measure. So I'll go with that. So the first full measure, you have a rest on beat 1. And while the right hand's holding, the left hand's playing. And by the way, this is true of the entire piece. The right hand and left hand do not play at the same time, meaning they do not hit a key or any keys at the same time. The right hand's either playing or it's holding a note, and while it's holding, the left hand plays, or it might be resting and the left hand plays. Looking ahead, I don't see that. So, in other words, again, you will never have both hands hitting keys at the same time. There's a lot of this back and forth. I'll go through that a little bit later when we get both hands together. So the left hand, resting on beat 1 in the first full measure, comes in on beat 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. All right, so that's with all the counting. Now, as far as what you're actually playing, as I said earlier in the lesson, the warm-up went through the 3 different chords you're going to be playing. Most of the chords in the piece are the C major chord. That's the very first chord we start with at the beginning, the C major chord. And it's always the C major chord there on out until the last measure of the second line. The last measure goes to the G7 chord. Okay, now you're on the third line. The second measure goes back to the C chord. The only time you have an F chord is at the end of the third line. It does not come in until beat 3. That's a little bit different than previous measures. And then the next measure on the bottom line, you hold it for 2 counts, and then you'll rest. Back to the C chord, and then the G7 chord, and then back to the C chord. Okay? Now, putting it together. Yes, that is always the trickiest part. In this piece, it's not too bad, especially if you go slow. Because as I was saying earlier, both hands do not play at the exact same time. It's going to be back and forth, back and forth. Or the right hand will be holding a note when the left hand plays. So here we go from the very beginning. I'm going to demonstrate. I'm not going to count out loud, but I am going to go very, very slow. And then we'll repeat. So a few details that I noticed when playing hands together that you want to be very careful of. When you get to the second full measure, or measure 3 at the very top line, you want to make sure this doesn't happen. Let me play it from the beginning and I'll demonstrate. Right there. A lot of people tend to hold on to the chord in the left hand, but there's a rest on beat 2. And when the right hand plays, think of it as a solo. It's all by itself. So the left hand needs to come up. And then the right hand gets the spotlight there. So the only holding or overlapping that should be going on is the right hand should be holding. Like the very first full measure. That note right there, that G is going to hold while the left hand plays. But when the right hand comes in again, the left hand's not holding. It's done. Okay? So be very careful not to hold the chords through the rests in the left hand. Look at the second line, second measure. It's back and forth. You know, I was saying back and forth, back and forth. It's good to know, but be careful that it's not. That's somewhat the idea, but not exactly. Those half notes need to be held in the right hand. See the difference? Makes the music, you know, feel like it's got a smoother quality to it. There's layers there. You know, you're holding one layer and another is entering. So it just gives it a better sound. So you definitely want to honor that and not cheat those half notes in the right hand when you come in with the quarter note chord in the left hand. Same thing I was saying with the top line. With these chords in the left hand, don't hold them through the rest. So when you hit that, in this case, the E with the right hand, the left hand should be up. Anytime, again, the right hand plays in this piece. Anytime a note hits in the right hand, think of it as a solo. The left hand is not even down when the right hand enters on their notes. So hopefully that makes some sense, but it's a consistency you can depend on in this piece. So when you get to the third line, the only time in this piece both hands do the same thing is the first measure on the third line, the second beat. Both hands have that quarter rest. So we should hear dead silence right there. So if I back up to the last measure on the second line, this is what it sounds like. Now, I deliberately lifted my hand so you could hear the break. I advise don't lift too high because then you got to go right back down. So do honor that rest in both hands. The other challenging spot is the last line because you have some chord changes here that occur a little bit quicker in the left hand. So starting on the first measure, the last two notes in the right hand, so you've got the C chord here in the left hand. When you get to this third measure, the G7. So be prepared to work a little bit more on that. Now, once you get everything good, you go back and do that repeat. As far as the repeat goes, pretend the music isn't going back, pretend it's continuing on. So what I mean by that is here at the ending, I did a little pause. See if you can avoid the pause. Like we were saying earlier, beat 1, beat 2, 3, and 4 at the beginning. You would never pause in the middle of a measure. This is the same thing, no pause. So we'll just keep on going like it's just a continuation because that's actually what it is. All right, so once you get all that down, you start to feel like I got the steady beat, I got my chords, I'm honoring the rests. You'll work on getting the time a little bit faster. Now, I've heard this piece, many arrangements played all over the place with tempo. It says march time, which is not that fast, march time. You could go faster if you want. Always remember accuracy before speed. So, before we end the lesson, it's been a long one, so thank you for hanging with me, but I felt like it was necessary. This is a big piece, the biggest one yet. A lot of important information, especially when moving forward in this book. So this is a piece you're definitely going to want to spend some extra time on. But before we go, I'm going to play it for you all the way through. And I'm going to play it a little bit faster for you. Maybe this will be the goal that you can try to obtain. I'll go ahead and stop there, but you get the idea. Now, one other thing that I'm not going to really spend a whole lot of time on because the book doesn't bring it up and you've already got a lot to worry about and to master. You may have noticed my right hand was louder than my left hand. If you're really interested in making this sound nice, that is something you can work towards. It is very challenging. If you don't learn it by the end of this piece, that is okay. We will still move forward in this book. But some people would say, I don't like that left hand. It's too choppy. It's too loud. Well, I think that makes a huge difference, making it softer. It's hard, like I said, to do one hand loud, one hand soft. But in this piece, it's not too difficult because the right hand is holding while the left hand gets its own attention. So, going slow enough, you might be able to focus on it. It's really cool because once you play it like that all the way through, it sounds like we've got two different, instrumentalists, two different people here. And it's pretty cool because, you're just one person doing that. So if you want to go for that, I think that's great. It'll definitely take your music to the next level. All right, thanks again. I appreciate you listening and watching this video. I hope it's been informative. I wish you all the best on this piece. And if you have any questions, please ask them in the comment section below. There are always things I forget. Everyone's hands are different. Everyone experiences it a little different. So please don't hesitate to ask, and I am more than happy to respond. Look forward to our next lesson together.